What I wanted to get your thoughts. Last week, the big news overall for the wrestling week, I would say, would be the mass TNA exodus that went down. We happened to lose, Tessa Blanchard's gone. Steve Macklin recently left, who you're very familiar with, and the big one, Tommy Dreamer, had parted ways with TNA as well. Rumor and innuendo could be potentially friend of the show, Road Dogg, might be taking over. But I want to get your thoughts overall on what the state of TNA right now is. We're so used to being LOL TNA. What does this mean for the next thing moving forward for the company?
First of all, I've never subscribed to LOL TNA. Go back to the beginning of my account. It's always been TN Awful.
Ooh.
Yes, that was for years just watching it. And I felt like of late they were getting their footing about them. I thought that they had a really strong roster of talent. I think that they were a fantastic alternative product. And then things just seem to have kind of fallen off the rails. They moved over to AMC. They were selling out buildings. You look at one building when they had the Hardys, and it was like several thousand people that were packed into there, and it looked really promising. Santana was a captivating new champion for them and someone to build on. And when you have guys like a Frankie Kazarian or a Nick Nemeth or some really great talents there like Moose or AJ Francis or the aforementioned Steve Macklin, the current BRCW World Heavyweight Champion,
Yes.
you're like, hey, this is kind of interesting and compelling. I don't know what happened with Tommy. I've not reached out. Tommy and I go way back. I'm a big fan of Tommy Dreamer and what he does. It sounds as though from the reports that I read that TNA was putting themselves up for sale.
That's the rumor, innuendo, I guess, right? But nothing's been confirmed. And then Matt Hardy went online and said that TNA is not selling, or at least maybe not to WWE, maybe. So
according, it's from what I had seen from various outlets, the possibility that TNA was looking for $30 to $50 million due to a significant amount of toxic debt that they currently have on the books, and that's part of why WWE was not interested in acquiring them outright.
Interesting.
I think the biggest value for TNA is the library. That has always been the money. I think back to when I was at WWE 20 years ago, and there was space in the WWE vault for a potential TNA aisle. Like, hey, if we could get this would be huge. WWE is always about owning every piece of content to be able to tell sort of cradle to the grave stories of their talent, similar to what they learned when we got the AWA library or the Mid-South library, or obviously the NWA WCW library. You can go back and educate your fans and say, okay, if you're just a WWF purist and you only knew Ric Flair as the guy who showed up with the Real World's title in 1992, here's all the other stuff he did. And when they put out that DVD and it sold like gangbusters, they were like, oh man, there are so many wrestlers over the years that have had tremendous matches in TNA that are buried amongst just acres of muck and sludge and terrible booking.
Right.
A TNA show for years was unwatchable. You could not watch all 2 hours of a TNA Impact without thinking that something was just fundamentally wrong with your brain.
Real quick, what era would you cite that being at its worst, TNA? Watchable, watching-wise.
Watchable. They really had maybe a year and a half, 2-year window in which they were a genuine threat. I would say somewhere in that 05 to 07 corridor, where they had gotten rid of you watch the early onset of TNA, it's a fever dream. Like the Vince Russo just running wild with the weekly pay-per-views, with the over-reliance on we're going to bring in a NASCAR driver, and that guy is going to be able to main event, that we're going to try to go over the top extreme with sex and violence and almost be insulting to your audience. That was kind of a difficult period to watch. And then when it became, we're going to go with Joe and AJ and Christopher Daniels. And then I was there when Christian showed up, and I was there when Kurt Angle showed up, and you're going, wow, those guys are really hitting on all cylinders, and Bobby Roode and James Storm and that beer money phenomenon.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, this is pretty captivating. And they were giving you great knockouts matches when WWE was not.
Mhm.
And then they fell into the trap of WCW and to an extent AEW. What names from the past can we bring in and put them on television to somewhat diminished returns? And all due respect to a lot of your co hosts over the years, their best work was not in TNA. They were not interested in making TNA a better product. And I'm really fascinated to watch the dark side of the ring that's going to be coming out, because that's supposed to be a fairly honest portrayal of what was going on in that company, what was going on with the number of creative minds that worked in TNA. You look at Bischoff, Russo, Cornette, Dusty. It's
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 a
a
who's who.
it's a who's who. It's, I mean, even people who I worked with, who worked there later in creative, who I'm not going to say their name because it's going to cause a visceral bile reaction out of me.
Mhm.
But they've brought in a lot of those great creative minds, and I always think back to, in light of, obsession being such a huge phenomenon, and that, like, you make that wish, but are you sure? The fact that Dixie Carter had that meeting with Paul Heyman, it is now the thing of just lore, of legend, of what is it going to take to bring you in, Paul, and give you complete control. And he said, I want your young talent. I want your TV time. I want to get rid of the old guys. And Dixie wouldn't do it. She wouldn't let him get rid of Hogan and Sting and Nash and a lot of these guys that he felt were pulling, and Foley and Flair, that were kind of pulling down the product. And there is a world where TNA could have been the prototypical AEW, where it's, we're going to give you Paul Heyman storylines with a guy who has the sensibilities to give you cruiserweight matches and hardcore matches and technical wrestling matches, and make the stories behind those matches to a large degree matter, with the financial resources that Dixie had available to her. That would have been a really exciting competitive time. It's why seeing what TNA has done over, this turned into a 12-minute TNA filibuster, and here we are.
Here we are.
Like Devin Dowling says, the main event Mafia was goated. You're misremembering moments within that storyline. But that, to be fair, is a lot of wrestling. You filled in for me on Working Stiff. You're talking with Scott Chapin about the NWO, and
Mhm.
Scott basically said, I wasn't alive watching the NWO. I only
Yeah.
saw the highlights and snippets. And it's like, yeah, you could make a compelling 7-minute video package about the main event Mafia, just like you make a compelling 7-minute package about the NWO. But that's not highlighting those 18 to 20-minute in-ring promos where they bring a motorcycle into the ring and you're letting every single person talk. And it was just brutal.
I know. I think the big crux with TNA for me, obviously, when they went head to head to for Raw, that was the same night Bret Hart showed up, returned to WWE, and all that. And you had a little bit of momentum and intrigue, but the aspect of them going live every other week and kind of them eating themselves within, and on top of it too, you don't find the balance. You mentioned the legends being there and everything like that. And I love that aspect, but if they were utilized in the right manner to build up some of their newer talent and find that balance between like an RVD and a Samoa Joe or an AJ
Well,
Styles.
that's the thing. Like, kids, you want to get mad at Tony Khan for not using Danhausen properly.
Mm-hmm.
TNA had Okada.
Right,
And you know
right.
what they did with Okada? They made him Kato.
That's
They had him follow around Samoa Joe in a Kato mask.
I forgot about that.
They had Punk.
They had Punk.
You had
Mm-hmm.
CM Punk coming with that Raven feud, which was done at another company that we do not name on this show.
I don't know
And it
what.
was the first time I saw that company, and the first time I saw CM Punk, and I was like, this is captivating and intriguing. They really had all the pieces and all the talent to make it work. It's why I'm always very, very angry with Tony and AEW, where I'm like, you're a student of history. You've seen what TNA did. You can avoid a lot of those pitfalls. And yet for years, there was a lot of that repeatability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now with TNA, we all want them to succeed. The
Absolutely.
wrestling world is better for TNA existing. I still have friends that are in that organization. I haven't checked the latest news. I'm assuming they're all still within that organization. They can go and pull levers and do kind of unique stuff. I want the righteous to succeed. I want the Hardys to succeed. Um, I just I don't know what's going on. My guess is this is financially motivated. That Anthem is seeing the money that they are losing right now. There isn't a marketing arm behind them, a merchandising arm. And the last time somebody saw a TNA T-shirt out in the wild, but
I'm trying to think of a TNA T-shirt that's memorable.
I don't know
Online.
what their AMC deal really is structured like. I think that's the other part of it that's kind of interesting. You know, you move to AMC. You and Scott brought this up. They did not up the production value.
No,
It did not
no.
change the way that show looks. And it's great that they're on TV, but what is the compelling force driving it there? And I think, Tommy is a great mind. He's a great creative mind. Road Dogg is a great creative mind. I was a fan of what he was doing on SmackDown for a while. I think it was funny that people didn't like it. It was a very meat and potatoes style of wrestling booking. And I think that
Absolutely.
there's absolutely a place for that. And I think if I were to sit down and look at the TNA roster, there's a lot of really good stuff there. And hopefully, they turn the corner and we're good.